You're listening to the Fully Occupied Show, presented by Occupier.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Fully Occupied Show. I am your host, Matt Giffune, co-founder of Occupier, lease management software company. Thanks for tuning in. We have a great episode here for you today. We are joined by Dan Rowe. Dan is the founder and CEO of Fransmart. They are a franchise development company that identifies emerging brands and helps them grow their franchise networks, not only with their proven playbook, but also with connecting them to a deep network of franchisees who have been there and done that. Dan also has an investment fund called the Kitchen Fund, where they invest in franchise businesses and restaurant concepts. So he has a very broad knowledge of the franchise space. This is one of the more detailed and nuanced conversations that we've had around the franchising world. So if you're an aspiring franchisee, anybody who's just interested in retail real estate, this is an awesome conversation. We hope you enjoy. Thanks. Dan, welcome to the Fully Occupied Show. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate you taking some time with us to dive deep into the good, the bad, and the ugly of the franchise world. But just for our audience who might not be familiar with you or your company and your background, can you give us a little bit of a taste of what Dan Rowe is all about?
Yeah. So for the last 30 years, we basically made a business out of trying to find the next big thing in restaurants or franchise companies as early as we possibly can find them. So half of our business is we have a fund. We're active investors. We were angel investors in like Sweet Green and Cava, for example, like way before anyone ever heard of these brands. And then on the other side, we're on the franchising side. We have a franchise development company called Fransmart. Our fund is called Kitchen Fund. Or Fransmart is the franchise development. But we got to Five Guys when they just had a couple stores. We launched their whole program. We had a company called Qdoba. We invested when there was just one. We did their franchising. Halal Guys, Middle Eastern chain from New York City, just had carts, but we're like, somebody's going to figure out how to do the Middle Eastern Chipotle. And we put the whole thing together. So for us, it's all about sort of getting there as early as we possibly can. We've got the chops to coach every franchisee and franchisor through it, so we don't really need bigger brands.
When you say put it all together, can you kind of break that down a little bit? So you identify Halal Guys and they're doing, halal carts on 6th Avenue in Manhattan, and you see an opportunity there because of the food and obviously the people who have started it are passionate about it. Like, where do you start? Like, how do you convince them to, hey, you guys should franchise this thing? And then what steps are you taking to help actually make that successful?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's funny you say that because it took me a year to talk them into franchising, because I said, hey, I'm the one that did Qdoba. And they're like, what's that? I'm like, I did Five Guys. And they're like, we never been. We don't know what that is. And so these were like really authentic Middle Eastern people that came to America really to feed their family. Right? Yep. The carts were there to feed their family. And then there's, I show up and, disrupt their lives. But we have a pretty predictable playbook. We've built, thousands of restaurants. And so we look at every brand. We always start with the end in mind. So when I looked at Halal Guys, I didn't care that it was carts. I said, this is going to be the biggest Muslim brand, Middle Eastern restaurant chain in the world, and which it is. And so we started off in United States, really North America, US and Canada. Canada behaves a lot like the US. And so we said, first thing first, we're going to go after the biggest 100 media markets. And in those markets, we're going to find the busiest mass gathering areas, airports, train stations, or just busy urban or busy suburban. Real estate's so important when you're introducing a new brand to a new market. So we have the real estate plan. We helped coach them through, because I had just come from Qdoba, which is basically the Chipotle, right? So it was very easy for me to figure out how to replicate Qdoba into a Halal Guys. And we have national everything. So we immediately tapped into a national real estate network, national design, national equipment, furniture, fixture, sign, POS, national vendors. They're famous for their white sauce. And even when they had carts, I found a national co-packer to make their famous sauces, and he's still the same co-packer. So we're able to go to these companies when they're really small, and because we've had some success, we're able to convince the rest of the supply line to treat this brand like the next big thing. And now Halal Guys is over 100 locations and it's on its way to 500 and all that good stuff. But it's sort of, it's real estate, it's entire supply line. And then the most important thing is the right franchisees.
Yeah, that's what that's where I was going to go with it, because there's the infrastructure part of setting it up, right? And you have obviously all the connections nationally to kind of have that economies of scale to grow the actual franchise, but then it's finding the network of people, right? Like that must be, I don't know, maybe it's easy, maybe it's hard. I don't know enough about that, but I would imagine that, your first call is to the guy that had the Qdoba franchises with you and said, hey, we got a new concept. You want to roll out, a region here, but like, how does that process work?
So it's pretty easy if you think about it. People buy a franchise because they're trying to get from where they are to some other place, right? Otherwise, why would you buy a franchise? Like you're doing whatever you're doing, but you buy a franchise. And to me, the only reason to buy a franchise is to get wealthy. Like it has to be successful and turn into something big. But with franchisees, like we already know that someone who's a franchisee of another brand, like specifically with Qdoba, my very first franchisee had 60 Pizza Huts. My second had 12 Applebee's. And we said, we're only going after people that are already successful franchisees. And we're going to go secret shop their stores before the discovery day. And so what that does is it makes sure that your franchisees already decided to be self-employed, which is a big deal. Self-employed with a franchise following somebody else's playbook, which is a really big deal. And then in food, you realize, food's tough. There's a lot of headwinds, right? So they already wanted to be self-employed, which is so different, following someone else's system in food. And then after they open and they realize it's not an ATM machine, they built more and more and more and more. So then we would go, look, to me, that's the most perfect example of your target franchisee, right? Is it compared to someone who he's got a lot of money, but he's never actually done his own thing or never built a franchise. Like that's a really big deal. If you get a franchisee who's arrogant and, he's been successful, that's why he's got money. Sometimes they always think that they know a better way, right? And that is in conflict with trying to build a brand. So you want someone who they get off following someone else's system. So for us, those were the targets. And we called them. So even to this day, like digital everything and SEO and all that other crap, it's like the best way to find the right franchisee is to pick up the phone and call them, or in LinkedIn, email them. But if you call a guy, so like we have a non-food brand that was here in Arizona. My franchisee has, 100 Papa John's, Jersey Mike's, a bunch of other things. Like they're really a franchise company. And so for them, those people want to expand with non-competing concepts, right? They've already got a footprint. They want to layer more brands over it. And so to me, that's where you go find your franchisees.
Yeah. So a guy like me who's never done this before might think that, hey, I could get rich doing this. It should be easy. Like, what advice do you have for that first-time franchisee? But because what I actually find attractive about it, if I were to want to go off and do this, right, as like a next venture or something I'm doing on the side, would be that there is a playbook. Like, I don't want to have to build the thing from the ground up. You go to someone like you who has the experience and the knowledge and the playbook to do it. That to me would seem like a very, an advantage. So I'm not just, buying a Dunkin' Donuts and trying to build it from scratch myself, right?
Right. Yeah, with Dunkin', Dunkin's an interesting one. That's where you're at. But in some cases, you can't get any more, right? Dunkin's so successful, and the only place you can get it are in markets clear across the country where no one really knows the brand, which gives other issues. But really the thing is and we've had a lot of first-time franchisees become very successful with us. Like several of them keep buying more of our brands. But with them, you have to recognize that they've never done it before. And so there's an element of personality profiling and personality testing to make sure that they're not the kind of people who are going to you're telling them to turn right at the sign, they want to turn left. And the more you tell them to turn right, the harder they pull left, right? You don't want those people. But if you get someone who's like, no, I'm going to follow the system, it's real easy, but you're going to have to treat them almost like it's a company location. So you have to be all on top of everything it takes to make them successful. Find the right site, build it the way it's supposed to so that the costs don't get out of whack, because that nothing will screw with a first-time franchisee more than spending more than he thought he was supposed to. Hiring the right people, right? There's really specific rules around staffing for the volume that you want, staffing for the company you're trying to build up front. And ironically, the business actually generates more money and it pays for that if you do it the right way. But a first-time franchisee may not know that. And so got to help them find the right sites, do the right marketing. They may think that they're doing the right thing, but if you're not really on top of it, so we treat each brand new franchisee like it's a company operation. We go pick the sites as if it's ours. We staff it as if it was ours. We do the marketing as if it was ours. We do it with them. The second best tip that I would give, if you were looking to buy a franchisee, the easiest thing in the world is to find the most successful franchisees in that system who are already succeeding doing that and say, what do I do? How do I do what you're doing? And I find every brand I've ever worked with, and I've even had a bunch of big 100+ unit franchisees on my podcast where they're like, we like helping new franchisees. Like, we like sharing because we don't want them to screw it up. So, there's a lot of things. The franchisor has to do extra work, but then these franchisees, like, they'll share their secrets of success. And that's really all you have to do, is you have to just go find the successful people and say, what do I do? I'm going to do exactly what you did. I want exactly what you have.
Yeah. One final question on this piece of it. I'm curious, like, if I were to be, opening my first Halal Guys franchise, like, what's the first hire that I make?
If you were a franchisee, the first hire is your multi-unit manager. So like, we sell a territory, let's say you bought 5, right? We wouldn't let you buy a 5-unit or a 10-unit territory and only staff for the first store, because you hear these horror stories of turnover, right? So like, if you bought this huge territory, we know how to pick the right real estate. We know how to do the marketing so that there's lines out the door. And if you open up with a skeleton crew and you have turnover, you're immediately in the hole. The last thing you're thinking about is more customers or more locations. So, for us, the first thing, we make you hire the multi-unit person and the manager and the kitchen manager. Like, it's redundant. It's actually a big extra, maybe another $200,000 in salary, but it's why those units are so successful. I'll give you an example. There are companies from New York. First franchisee opens up in Costa Mesa, California, like clear across the country, couldn't get any further. That store opened up with a director of ops from Panera, a kitchen manager from Chipotle, I think a GM from Panera Chipotle, but they went and they hired the right team, right? Staff for the sales that you want. They did $100,000 their first week in sales. And that store did $3 million a year forever out of 1,700 feet, like something the size of Subway doing plus $3 million. Well, that store self-funded 8 more or 7 more, whatever. They built like a real company. Our franchisee in Houston opened up. He used to scream at me because I kept denying his real estate. And finally, we found a good piece of property. I think he did $3.7 million his first year, and now he's up to 7 or 8, right? So it's like, but he did 2 things. He picked the right locations and he hired the 3 or 4 unit team day one. So, a normal Halal Guys might do $1.5 million in sales. If you have one that does 3 million, that thing's throwing off like another $500,000 in profit. It's more than worth the extra, a couple $100,000 to build the right team. But you have to plan, because there's going to be turnover. There's going to be people that you hire that decide that this isn't for them. You still have to get from where you are to where you're trying to go, in spite of the fact that there's going to be turnover, right? So you gotta, that's it. That would be my advice to anyone, is don't get into franchising unless you're doing it to get wealthy, to build a big company that makes a lot of money that you can sell someday for like a life-changing amount of money. And all this success will be in your first store. And so many people get it wrong because they ask franchisees that have mature locations, like, oh, what's your labor percentage, or what's your this? And they try to open day one with that number. And it's like, those people aren't grooved. They don't know what they're doing. They're not up to that kind of volume. And so what happens, they choose not to come in the next day. Right? They're just not coming to work. So you got to hire, you got to staff for the volume you want, staff for the company that you're trying to build. And so, like, you being a first timer, we just wouldn't let you open. Like, we assume that you're not going to get it right. We assume that you're going to make mistakes. We assume you're going to hire the wrong people, so that we can go back and make sure. We don't want, it's not good for you if we just say, okay, well, he sounds confident and doesn't want me to bug him. So
yeah. You just kind of, flapping out in the breeze on a branch. That's not the best way to do it. So you buy a 8 location territory, you build your staffing to handle that territory, and then you open your first store knowing that that is what's going to kick off the expansion into the rest of the territory.
Yeah. And the halal guys, ones I mentioned, they did double the average volume. They could handle it, right? A 1-inch water hose will only get so much water through it. If you want it, no matter how hard you push, if you want to get more water through it, you need a bigger hose. So we would put, 5-inch hose worth of people in the store, market the hell out of it. And by the time that the restaurants naturally come down and find their level, now you've got a whole staff of people that are grooved. They know what they're doing. You've worked through those that want to leave. And now you've got your core team. Now you can move to your second site, and it's seamless. It's effortless. Like all your new employees could come train in your first store, and they're around people who sort of run at high speed. So that's how I would do it. I mean, there's really no other way to do it. There's no way that if you open up to a $5 million volume with a $1 million team, sales will find
it'll eventually level down to that $1 million kind of that bottom. Yeah.
And then now what happens is now you've got $1 million, $800,000 location that's modestly profitable, but you've got serious money tied up. You've invested. Now you've got maybe a loan. You've got a lease. You signed a lease. So you got that contingent guarantee. You're like, holy crap, that's not what I thought I was getting. So that's why like we take the extra time to sort of work with our franchisees to kind of work through that. So.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we still get franchisees that argue with us. Like they'll argue with us. I have one, I don't want to mention the brand or where, but they're getting anxious to find a location and open. There's no A sites available just yet. They've only been in the system a little bit. And I'm like, be patient. We identified the bullseyes. We did all the analysis and stuff to find the bullseyes and went into each of those trading areas to find out exactly the target projects that we want to go into. And they agreed to it. And because there's nothing available, they're willing to go to a secondary or tertiary site. And they're like, I just want to get open. I can't wait to get open. It's like, it's going to be, you may as well light your money on fire.
Yeah. You're shooting yourself in the foot, right? Yeah. When you're looking at bringing brands into your network, like what are some of the traits or things that you look for? Like you mentioned halal guys, but I mean, are you looking at the people that have founded this brand? Are you looking at the cuisine? What are like the top 3 things that you look for when saying, hey, we want to bet on this one?
Probably the top 3. We look at a lot of things, but the top 3 is that the brand has to have an authentic DNA, not a Me Too, not a copycat, right? You got these Dave's Hot Chicken or whatever that do ridiculous numbers. Once a week, someone else is trying to get us to franchise their knockoff chicken brand that does 1/3 of the sales. So authentic soul, authentic DNA, like at Five Guys, there really was mom, dad, and 5 boys. Halal guys, there really were 3 guys that were Muslim that came over, and they were doing it to feed their family. So authentic soul, I don't want a copycat, I don't want a Me Too. And then the second thing is unit economics. And what I mean by that is that the numbers have to be so good, the profit has to be so good, you want to keep reinvesting because business is hard. Like even a good concept, you still got issues, right? You still got problems. The numbers have to be so compelling that you want to keep reinvesting. So we call that compounding or blitzscaling. You open up 1 or 2, 5 guys, and then you let the money roll into a third. You let those 3 fund 2 more. You let those 5 fund, 7 more. And on and on and on and on. You build this big business. Someday you can sell. And so we want something that's got economics where franchisees are going to want to do that. And then the last thing that I look at is the runway, right? The runway. So like with us, we coach all of our franchisees to build really big, really fast, really successfully and sell. Even if they don't sell, that's sort of the game plan. Like we want you to take a small investment, compound it into something huge and have an exit. And you can't do that if the concept is past its prime. Right? You can't do that today in burgers. Nobody's paying huge multiples on, wannabe Five Guys. No one's paying, huge multiples like a burrito. You're going to go try and compete with Chipotle. They got all the good sites. Like you can't go after this. No one's going to pay a big multiple, but you can if you've got the next thing, right? Like the Dave's Chicken or, the next healthy thing like Sweet Green and Cava have ridiculous multiples because they like the market values their runway. Like the market's looking at their runways. Like not only do they have a footprint, but those companies can grow 20x. Right? Yeah. So you've got to be at that point. Everything has a beginning, middle, and an end. You've got to be early enough in there where you can keep growing and growing and growing and still sell at the peak. Your multiples are going to be way higher.
Yeah, and that's done through what? Differentiating the cuisine? Like, because I don't know, like, give me your candid thoughts on where you think the holes and opportunities are. Because you could walk down, I live in Boston and I work right here on Boylston Street, and there's a strip that has a Dig, a Sweet Green, a Chick-fil-A, a Chipotle, Cava. Like, there's no more real estate left for something that is just like those things, because who's going to go pay $16 for a bowl at the knockoff Chipotle when he could go to Chipotle and pay 13, right? So is it Asian cuisine? Is it like a vegan? Like where are the goods?
I think the growth is in healthy and ethnic. But the ethnic can't be like Indian for Indians or Muslim for Muslims. It has to be the Chipotle of, right? Like it has to be mainstream pointed. Your customers, you're trying to get customers that are going to Chipotle, Five Guys, Panera to come try this. And so it has to be mainstream. We have an Indian concept called Curry Up Now, like Hurry Up Now. It's founded by an Indian family, but they sort of did it in a very safe, approachable way. And the numbers are ridiculous, like really good numbers. Halal Guy, same thing. It's like, it's not Muslim for Muslims. It's Muslim for mainstream. So you have to find that. Real estate, you're a real estate guy. Like, you know, a lot of times Boylston's not the place to go. Like Boylston, that pond is overfished and the prices are really high.
Right.
It's like the argument for going to Times Square. It's like, no, like there, you know, you think that, hey, there's all these people, your restaurants are going to do, 10 times the volume. It's just never been the case. Your costs are a lot higher, but what it is you have this supply and demand imbalance. There's too many people chasing those people. You can use like a Placer AI. If I had a concept that was kind of going after the healthy sect, I would look at the greater Boston metro and I'd say, where are the busiest Panera, Sweet Green, Dig, whatever, pick 6 or 8 more brands. And I'd look and where those are. They may not be on Boylston. They may be in Worcester, right? They may be somewhere else. And so that's where I would open up first. I would basically open up where I have the highest chance at the highest amount of success. But I just, I've just seen too many brands on the Boylstons of the world. It's like they chase sites. I mean, if you can get a good one at a good price, great. But man, everybody's going there. They almost look at them like billboards, like they're willing to lose money to be there.
Yeah, loss leader.
It's like, why do you want to compete with that? Right.
Yeah, they do come and go. I will say that.
Yeah, vegan. I think vegan's done. Vegan, plant-based. Like I was excited about it a couple of years ago, beginning of COVID. They're all washed out. Like they're all washed out.
Do you think that's just because the audience is too small? There's just like, or people just like meat, a little bit of both?
I think some of it is the audience. I think that there's an audience of vegans, but the real money was to go after people like me that would do meatless Mondays or something like that.
Yeah,
like
once a week or something. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, what happened is every time you turned around, they're saying, well, Beyond and whatever those other ones were so filled with so much garbage that you think that you're trading off meat onto something synthetic until you realize what goes into it. You're like, that's not actually better for me.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't taste great. Like I've never heard anyone go to a vegan restaurant. Oh, this is better than a steakhouse. This is better than, Five Guys. It's like, no, it's just good for vegan. But then I think what happened too is too many people chased it. Like in LA, we had looked at a brand. It was on Melrose. It actually had really good numbers. It had good numbers the year we looked at it. Within the next year, it dropped 30%. Second year, dropped 30%. Kevin Hart, that famous actor, opened up his vegan burger brand on the same street. He was busy. They're all gone right now. They're all gone. So, that's not where I would go if I were trying to create wealth in this business. Is I like going after the big segments with the next thing. Right?
Yeah.
Like Five Guys didn't invent burgers. They just sort of were the next trade up. Like, Chipotle and Qdoba didn't invent burritos, right? They just did sort of that next thing. And so I think that I would go after a very big, very broad segment with kind of the next thing, but only if the economics are good.
Yeah. You brought up real estate. I mean, obviously COVID had a major impact on retail, restaurants, dining. I don't know if that's still reverberating through the real estate world from your perspective, or it's just back to normal. But how have things changed? I mean, you mentioned, people might not want to look at the busiest street in the city because it's washed out. Or are suburban locations becoming more attractive to franchisees? Are like what are the trends that you're seeing on the real estate side?
100%. So I was just on a trip. I went to Toronto, New York, Philly, DC for 3 weeks in a row. Just went to each city. The downtowns are still obliterated. There's so many vacancies and just so much vacancy.
Yeah.
The suburbs have almost no vacancy. So, I mean, that sort of exposed even at concepts like Sweetgreen, like the urban only markets took it on the chin. So Dig is another one you mentioned. Like Dig took it on the chin. They had most of their sites in urban only markets. And it's like, no one saw that coming. And the truth is you hear like, people talking about, I got to go back to work. It's still less than half. Like the vacancy rates are still huge. And it's misleading because the vacancy rates are high, but they also count people who actually sign leases, who have signed leases, who are paying rent, but all their employees are at home.
Yeah.
Right. So when you really look at like what percentage compared to, if before COVID was 100%, it's less than 50%.
And no one's ever going to get to that real number. Like that true occupancy number is, the real estate services firms will tell you that downtowns are thriving. Look at the vacancy rates they're shrinking. Class A is doing great. But it's like, okay, our leases are getting signed, but are people actually coming in 5 days a week and buying their lunch outside of the office?
Yeah. And you asked, like, I think one of the other things that changed is, man, the degree that off-premise dining was sped up because of COVID. All these people, remember the full service concepts used to be like, I'm not doing that. It's not good for my food integrity bullshit. Every one of them, like Famous Dave's put in a drive-through line. Chili's put in a drive-through line. Now you see on television, Chili's is doing a freaking meal deal for $10. Like, because they just can't compete. They just waited too long to become relevant in the off-premise arena. But off-premise is everything. And it's tough because it's expensive. Like you still have all those swipe fees. You have the off-premise fees, like delivery fees or the, online ordering fees. They're ridiculous. They hurt the business. They really hurt. They hurt everything,
But you have to do it to compete with the ones that are native to that, right?
You have to do it. And, and you're seeing, look at all the chains that are going bankrupt right now, right? Like look at Red Lobster and all these big chains that just before COVID, they were great big chains. And but yeah, it's tough. No, you got to have, that's another thing. Like your numbers have to be so good. It makes you want to still put up with high. They have to be so good in spite of the off-premise fees. They have to be so good in spite of the fact that, it's tough labor market and, look at the minimum wage going up. It's just like you still have to be really, really successful. We just invested in a concept from Idaho. It's a drive-through healthy concept. He has 40% profit margins. So his sales are really high, but he has 40% profit margins. An average Five Guys Friday lunch has 8 or 10 employees on shift at lunch if you just go in on a Friday. Konala, this concept's called Konala. It's got 3 or 4. So he's figured out how to do, and he's doing way more than a Five Guys. So he's doing more volume than a Five Guys with half the labor. Right. So it's concepts like that are going to attract people. Like today, the only people buying Five Guys are existing Five Guys franchisees because it's easy for them to expand,
replicate,
bolt on new locations. The ROI is not what it was back when I launched it. Like it used to be get your money back in a year or 2. Like now it's 3 or 4, like, and maybe 5. And who wants to deal with that with all those contingent liabilities? So they will with the Five Guys because it's 2,000 units and it's proven and all this stuff. But if you're an emerging brand, your numbers have to be so compelling that a Five Guys guy wants to stop building Five Guys and build your thing instead. And it can't be a little bit better. It can't be the same numbers, can't be a little bit better because of the headwinds. You're not the same as Five Guys.
Yeah. One final question for you. Like what is Chick-fil-A doing that no one else has caught on to yet? Because I was up in Nashua, New Hampshire this past weekend for a baseball tournament for my kids. We needed to get some food afterwards. They were starving. And so I went online and I looked what was in the area. There was a Chick-fil-A. I was like, oh, we'll just drive down to Chick-fil-A. I got there. The line was out the parking lot. The store line was out the door. And they were pumping out online orders. And
Yeah.
it was almost like madness. They had it down to a science, but
Yeah.
it was as though this was like the busiest place in the entire radius of like 10 miles, this
Yeah.
one chicken store. And I don't know, like if it's just reaching peak popularity or if they're doing something operationally that people aren't doing, but it was I was like, I'm in a suburb in New Hampshire and this place is just going bananas.
Yeah, they're like here in Arizona, clear across the country. I hired someone from Chick-fil-A. She was a assistant manager that came into corporate, but they were doing 10 million bucks a year, 6 days a week, right? I mean, the average in and out, it's 2 or 3 times the volume, 4 times the volume of a lot of drive-through chains, and they're doing it 6 days a week. They're probably the best example of staff for the volume you want, staff for the company you're trying to build. So they invest, like here in Arizona, we're on this weird record heat wave. But if you go into the drive-through lines at a Chick-fil-A, they have people standing outside
with the
to
iPad
take your
order.
orders.
Yeah, there's like 5
that
of them.
have misters. They have misters. They give them, like they build these little shelters out there.
Yeah.
Cooling stations, right. And then you go to McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, Taco Bell, they don't do any of that stuff, right? And so you think about, well, if I had Chick-fil-A sales, then I would do that. It's like, I think you're reading it backwards. If you do that, then you'll have Chick-fil-A sales because they've really got a staff. They basically pay for people to be happy and enthusiastically doing their job. And when's the last time you went to Taco Bell or McDonald's and felt like they were really glad to see you or that you mattered? So they're probably the best example of staff for the company you're trying to build. And in doing it and paying more money for their people, throwing more money towards what makes their employees optimized, their sales are 2, 3, 4 times what everyone else is doing. So I don't know why more people haven't figured that out.
Yeah, you could tell that their employees are engaged and they're happy doing their jobs. Like it's a different experience going in there than, like you said, going into like a Taco Bell or.
But it's the same. The one we have, it's like this. The one we have is right next to a Freddy's, a Wendy's, McDonald's, Burger King. They're and an In-N-Out's like a half mile away. Their lines, like they have sometimes 2 and 3 lines of people that eventually converge. But they're like, they have to have traffic cops out there sometime. Then you go look at some of these other chains. It's like they have 2 people in line, probably people that just don't want to wait in Chick-fil-A's line. But, you think about it, like people vote with their wallets. People vote with their wallets and they're voting to put up with those long lines because it's actually pretty pleasant experience. And, you can argue the chicken's good or whatever. I don't know if it is. But yeah, I think that they staff for the volume that they want.
Dan, great conversation. Tons of insight. I learned a lot here. This has been fun. Let's wrap it up with some rapid fire questions here. Question number 1: if you could build your dream food court, what restaurants are in it?
It would be the category killers. So like we just talked about Chick-fil-A, like you obviously have to have the category killers or the next best version. So the holy trinity is burgers, chicken, pizza. I would have Chick-fil-A, Five Guys. I'd have something interesting. I don't really love any pizza concepts. Ethnic food that's built for mainstream, like a Halal Guys of the world. Like Halal Guys does weird sales. Panda sales are just ridiculous, right? So it's like I would have those. And then I think some good all day brands. Like I would have a Starbucks and I would have kind of the next drink concept. Look at these swigs. Have you ever seen a swig?
I've seen the swigs. I've never had it though. Yeah.
Right. I mean, just crazy. Like you think Chick-fil-A's lines are long, go look at swig. And so I would kind of have a mix. Like people feel safe with Starbucks, and then I would put the next thing in there too, so that you've got both.
Yeah,
but I'd get rid of everything old. I'd get rid of You don't want to put a Sbarro in there. Yeah, man.
Everyone's had that cold Sbarro slice when they've needed to eat something. Of all those cuisines, personally speaking, question number 2, like, what's your favorite cuisine? If you had to have one cuisine for the rest of your life, what would you be eating?
Italian, no doubt.
Yeah, same here. That's my, well, that segues into the next question. Top travel destination that you haven't been to yet.
That I have not been to or have been to?
Well, either way, your choice.
My 2 favorite places in the world to go to are Maui and Amsterdam. So 2 very different places. The place that I want to go to that I've never been to would be like Croatia, Greece, like some of these areas, these coastal towns. I'd want to go find some of them that haven't been overly commercialized yet, but go kind of look at
Yeah.
like go to some of those markets. And I haven't been there yet.
Yeah. Question 4, a broader one. What advice would you give to future generations?
My advice would be do no harm. Like that's the big thing. Don't sell it. When you sell a bad franchise, like you could wreck someone's life. Like someone's married with kids, mortgage, and they venture out to do a franchise. If you sell a bad deal, you could wreck their life. So my feeling is don't do any harm and only focus on getting wealthy when your franchisees are wealthy, right? So like that's been my motto is I want to get wealthy, helping other people get wealthy. In franchising, it doesn't work any other way. Like if you're not successful with your franchise, you're not going to pay royalties. You're not going to open up another store. You're not going to refer people to me. And, like it's the perfect equalizer. Franchising only works. It's the, what they call it, servant leadership. It's the purest form of that. And so, but I still see people, I get called, 2 times a day, people reach out to us to help them franchise a brand. When we dig into their numbers, they're not even profitable at the corporate level. So they're not even profitable and they want to sell you a franchise. Well, if they're already breaking even or losing a little bit of money, you're going to lose more because you got to pay royalties, right? And so there's some people with no conscience. They would sell anything to anyone to make a buck. And that's my advice is don't do that. Like that's just bad news.
Yeah. Final question, which is a standard question we ask everybody. If you could name 1 or 2 people that you think would be great guests for this show, who would they be?
I would. There's a lot of good people to talk to. I think you should talk to franchisees, right? The franchisees, those are the ones that are on the line doing it. What does it take to be a successful you? So I would look at like Bill Gellert. He's got 105 guys, started with 0 and built 105 guys. Andrew Fagali is another really good guy. Both of these guys are in YPO, by the way. But Andrew Fagali, one of these rags to riches stories, basically started off as a scrub and now I think he's coming in at $100 million as a franchisee. You built a business now that's worth a lot of money. And so people that are actually getting wealthy with their franchises are the ones I would recommend you talk to, because most franchisors are just trying to hawk their bullshit. But franchisees are the ones actually out there doing it. And it's like, what do you look for? How are you navigating the headwinds? What do you think about urban markets? Franchisors aren't going to give you the right. It's tough, right? So like with franchisees, you're going to hear more of the story. So more of my podcast is also just like both of those guys been on my podcast, and it's like, how do you do it? How'd you do it? How can a guy like Matt learn from you?
Yeah.
Like that's it. And it's funny because if you wind them up, they'll just talk for hours.
Yeah. Well, Bill's a friend of the franchise here. We've been working with him for a long time. So it's good to see that there's some synergies there. Well, Dan, appreciate your time. This has been great. We'll have to do it again in a year or so and see how things have changed in the franchise world. But if people wanted to learn more about Fransmart, connect with you, how would they do so?
Yeah. Dan at Fransmart or just fransmart.com. But Dan at Fransmart. Simple, easy.
Keep it easy.
All right,
Dan.
man. Thanks
Appreciate
for
your time. Take it easy.